Okay. So as many of you know, Glenn Fox usually gives presentations on the Omnibus update. I think when you see my what's left to do slide, you'll understand why he couldn't be here today. Yeah, there's still lots to do. So he sends his regrets, but he asked me to talk on his behalf. So a little bit about me. I am new to the land remediation branch, but not new to risk assessment. I've been working on risk assessment for quite some time now. But I have been involved with the Omnibus project since I joined the branch. So I can certainly talk about status where things are at. They were well on their way to working on this when I joined. So some of the schedule-specific questions you may have, I'll probably have to address elsewhere, but I'm happy to do so. So today I was just going to give an overview of some of the comments we've received to date, and as well I've pulled out some of the BCELTAC specific comments, and I'm able to provide the ministry's responses to some of those comments for you today. And then I'll just talk a little bit about next steps, what's left to still be done on Omnibus. As I mentioned, there's quite a bit. And then we'll go from there. So when the public comment period closed, we had received just under 300 comments, and from a variety of groups. So municipalities commented, labs commented, different government agencies commented, consultants, business groups, and agencies. So we were really pleased. I mean, given that the comment period was over the summer, that was high engagement for us, and we were quite happy to see those comments and that level of engagement from a variety of groups. We actually had unanimous support on a few things. So everyone agreed that the proposed ongoing cycle to update the standards was a good idea, and so we will be including that in the update and getting a fixed cycle going. There was unanimous support for the proposed high-density residential land use standards, and as well for the new parquet vapor standards. There was strong support for using the tox-based drinking water standards as opposed to the aesthetic-based standards. The schedule formats that we laid out, people were supportive of those. The proposed modified regression method that we will be using to derive the new wildland standards was supported. Deferring the irrigation watering, the livestock watering, and the sediment standards to the next cycle was supported. Eliminating Schedule 7, so the triggers for the contaminated sites relocation agreements, people supported that, as well as updating the Schedule 10 soil and drinking water standards. Then we get into the concerns, and I have 3 very busy slides. There was lots of concerns, so I've tried to group them together under sort of themes. So sort of the administrative type concerns, people wanted to have a chance to further consult once the actual calculated standards became available. They wanted to know if analytical methods, particularly for emerging toxicants, would be available. Would we retain the background and detection limit checks? And would there be a grandfathering period between using the old standards and when the new standards would be enacted? Then we had some toxicity reference value related concerns, TRV related concerns. Using the tox-based drinking water standards, people wanted to know if there would be consistency with Health Canada's drinking water standards. People wanted a chance to review the TRV list, the TRVs we were proposing to use to derive the new standards. And as well, what the TRV hierarchy that we would be using to pick the TRVs for derivation of the new standards. There is also some concern with conservatism, so both in the groundwater model as well as the exposure times for human health calculations. People were concerned about the timing and scope for the consequential amendments to other regulations that would be affected by the standards update. So primarily the hazardous waste regulation and the organic materials recycling regulation, or OMA. There was lots of concern, this was a controversial topic, whether we would choose to adopt the CCME, petroleum hydrocarbon analytical methods, or whether we would still use the BC regime, and I will talk about that in a future slide. And as well, there was some concern around how we would enforce some of the prohibitions that we'll place on the high-density residential land use, so the no playgrounds and the 3-story rule. And then specific to the newly proposed wildland standards, people were concerned that they were too conservative and that they would drive up the cost for assessment and remediation. There was some concern around combining the lethal and non-lethal study results to derive the standards in the event that we didn't have enough non-lethal data to use. There was low support for having human health vapor wildland standards, and as well people were requesting clarity around when to use the urban park versus the wildland standards in cities. So some BCELTAC specific comments. And up till now, a lot of this has been repeated. Glenn has presented this at a few other conferences, but this stuff is new. We haven't posted any of this to the web yet. So BCELTAC is concerned that there would be sufficient time to ensure that analytical methods could be checked, that there would be available, and whether detection limits, whether they'd be able to check those. And so the ministry has agreed. We currently are entering into a confidentiality agreement with BCELTAC. We will be providing the calculated standards to them in advance so they can be on their stuff. They wanted soil standards reported in micrograms per gram or milligrams per kilogram dry weight. And again, the ministry agreed. We'll be changing the footnote in Schedule X, whatever Schedule X becomes, to report that all values will be in micrograms per gram dry weight. And so back to that controversial point, whether we'd be sticking with the BC petroleum hydrocarbon regime or adopting CCME. As I mentioned, that was controversial. There was lots of contradictory information. So we are sticking with the BC regime at the moment, but we are going to be evaluating that for the next cycle. There was a request by BCELTAC to update and define the dioxin toxic equivalency factors calculation in Schedule 5, and the ministry has agreed we will be doing that. There's also a request to define DDT and DDT metabolites for Schedules 5 and 6, and we will be doing that as well. We've agreed to that request. There's a request to clarify the ammonia standard for Schedule 6. We've agreed we'll be reporting that. It will be specified as N. And there was also some discussion around emerging toxicants and including nanomaterials. And while the ministry has agreed, we are unable to do that for this round. So that will be deferred to the next update. Also with emerging toxicants, BCELTAC advised us against developing a standard for total alkylated pHs, and we've agreed we won't be doing that. And there was a request to remove the total PAH sediment criteria as it's not tox-based, and we have agreed, although the sediment, as I mentioned earlier, the sediment standards are going to be deferred to the next cycle, so that is a priority for the next update. And there was talk about defining the requirement for the hardness calculation. And so the ministry has deferred this issue. So the Environmental Sustainability and Strategic Policy Division is currently working with the University of Lethbridge
And I can speak to this a little bit in more detail because of my past position with the ministry, but they were working with the University of Lethbridge, and the hope was that they would be developing a hardness guideline. It looks like that's actually not going to be the case. There is some confounding information, and so it will likely be more of a guidance document around how to deal with hardness at your site. So that one, regardless, that one is being delayed until the next cycle. And then there was a request to address issues with Schedule 4 and 5 standards for having standards for peat soils and wetlands. So CAP is currently sponsoring research for developing a SALT standard for wetlands, and we're hoping that that information will be available for this cycle. The broader wetland standards won't be. We'll have to look at those for the next cycle. So what still needs to be done? The final protocol papers need to be completed and posted to the web. We need to finish calculating the draft standards and then provide those to BCELTAC so they can do their DL checks. There's some facilitated consultations that needs to happen, and as well the consequential amendments to those regulations that are affected by the standards update that I mentioned, the hazardous waste drag and OMAR. There may be some revisions to the P11 upper caps that need to be dealt with, and then we need to complete the Minister's Office package so that that can be approved. And so I did this slide a while ago, and all these dates have changed. The response to comments, they are almost finalized, and my understanding is they will be posted to the web soon. So those ones that I highlighted from BCELTAC will be there, as well as any other comments and responses will be posted shortly. It's proposed that the final protocol papers will be posted to the web by the end of November. The First Nations and consultation process that needs to happen, I have here in November, but I haven't heard anything more about that yet, so I'm not sure if that date is still accurate or not, but I can find out if anyone's interested. And we still have number crunching to do, and so we've said mid-October to mid-December, but I'm told that Christmas break, we may not get the break. So it depends where things are at by mid-December. And that's pretty much it. I'm happy to take questions. As I mentioned, schedule-specific questions and topics may need to be directed elsewhere, but I'm certainly able to do that. And that's it.
Good. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming Guy Patrick. He needs no introduction for most of you, I think, but if you choose to introduce yourself.
I'll introduce myself.
You saw it on the bottom. Always good to hear.
So thanks very much, folks at CARO, for putting on this webinar. I think it's great to be able to communicate to as many folks as we can of the changes that are coming. You can see on this slide here, I have my own company, Patrick Consulting Inc. I was with Golden for 29 years before that, and I'm also one of the founding members of GeoEnviro-Pro, a learning company. And why am I here today? Well, as I said, I've been consulting now since '81 and practicing in BC since '91. I've been a member of the CSAP organization BC since it began, and part of my role at CSAP was to provide feedback to MOE on behalf of CSAP. So I wanted to communicate some of that, share some of that with you today. I'm a registered P.Eng in BC and also the Yukon. I understand there's several folks from the Yukon on this call here. So, and my experience in the Yukon, they adapt or adopt the regulations that we have here in BC. So it's important that you get up to speed on what's happening here. So Jennifer gave a good presentation of where the MOE is at with these omnibus changes. I'm going to back up a little bit for those of you that maybe aren't quite exactly familiar with what's happening here. As an overview comment, the Contaminant Site Regulation numeric standards, most of them came out in 1996, 97. And for those of you that have been around for a while, before that we had the draft standards from the Expo site. The draft 1989 standards we're using based on the Dutch ABC system. So we've come a long ways. But since 96, 97, there have not been a whole pile of updates. I know arsenic is one that was updated. The standard went down, and there's been a few tweaks to iron and manganese. But for the most part, science has moved on, and we've been living in the past. And that's probably not a good thing. So what's happening is that virtually all the standards are being revisited. Some are going to go up, meaning they're going to be less stringent, and some are going to go down. A good example for the standards that are likely to go up, I mentioned here petroleum, hydrocarbons, and soil. One of my goals was to, through CSAP, work with the MOE to look at their model. I saw one of the comments was the model that's being used to come up with soil standards seen as too conservative. It all depends what parameter you're looking at. But for petroleum, hydrocarbons, there's an allowance there for biodegradation. The net effect is that several hydrocarbon standards are actually going to go up, become less stringent. On the other side of the coin, some of the, maybe not necessarily because of the model, but, you know, an example might be arsenic. If you look at the tox-based standard for arsenic, we're already way above the tox-based standard. It could go down, but I don't think they're going to do that because it would cause a screw-up for every water treatment plant in Canada. So, overview of the changes. There's going to be changes made to numeric standards for soil, groundwater, and soil vapor. And as Jennifer mentioned, all the soil standards are being pulled together now in one schedule, Schedule X. Sounds a little scientific, eh? X-Man. Groundwater is going to be all under one, Schedule W, so that's kind of nice. And then the soil vapor standards. I put in here in parentheses, substances are going to be listed alphabetically, not by substance class. My comment as CSAP, I don't think many people went along with my concern, but I'm kind of a science-based guy. I like to see chemicals grouped in their classes. So when I see them together, I can compare them with the grouping and try and get a feel for what's happening in the subsurface. The more standard way, the more robotic way, is you just put them all in one big alphabetical table like a computer. And apparently that's what's going to happen here in BC. Anyways, get used to it. I'll suck it up and get used to it. No changes to the sediment standards now, as Jennifer mentioned. There will be changes, though, and for those of you that aren't aware, Health Canada has been looking at human-based, health-based standards for sediment now for quite some time. I don't know how long they can sit on this, but when it finally does come out, I think the province will look at those standards and presumably adopt them. So there will be changes coming to the sediment standards one day as well. Now, on the overview of the proposed changes, there's a bunch of new substances and substance classes of compounds that are going to be added here. And I know this is going to be a big deal for the labs. I'm sure we're going to hear about this in the next talk. But things like, triclosan, some of the bactericides that were added to your toothpaste and all kinds of products, healthcare products. I don't think that ever, my first degree is microbiology, and this blatant overuse of antibiotics should have been stopped 20 years ago. In the 70s we knew it was a wrong thing to do, and here we are now finally regulating. Crazy. But anyway, these things are down at part petroleum levels of concern. Well, actually all these things, and I guess we'll hear more about this in the lab, but for me this is a big deal. When you talk about endocrine disruptors, PFAS, the perfluorooctane sulfates, these guys are of concern at nanogram per liter in water, or even less. That's the way, hormones, that's the way they work in the body of an organism, really tiny. So the implications for people in the field trying to collect this data, how do you collect this data in a representative fashion? This is a big deal. I don't think it's been thought through too well. One example, these perfluorooctanes, and any fluorinated compound, you got to be super careful of what you're using in the field. And here, you ever used a BO vial with a Teflon septa? Forget it. No more Teflon. If you're going to collect that water, you're going to use a plastic vial. Are you crazy? These things super absorbent. If you pulling water up out of a monitoring well with a 1/4-inch HDPE tubing or Teflon, no. You know, millisecond and your part per billion is gone, stuck on the side of the plastic. So you're going to be biased everything low. So I'll just tell you flat out right now, I think this is, for me, one of the biggest issues is getting reliable data. If we actually decide we have to analyze for these things, we need a proper procedure and really well-trained field folks. Otherwise, we're going to get garbage. We're going to spend a lot of money. CARO's going to spend a lot of money analyzing something non-detect when there may have really been something there. And I'm going to continue on my rant here because I still got a few minutes. Well, why would we ever test for PFOS, right? So the thing about the PFOS is that, yeah, sure, it's in firefighting foams. It's a big deal at airports. So anybody working in airports, you're going to have to be, you know, you're looking for this stuff, which is good. But a lot of these things also end up in landfills. You know, it used to be part of packaging, food packaging. It's not banned today, but it wasn't 20 years ago. All this stuff's sitting in landfills now. So any new landfills that aren't already closed, that are part of a monitoring program, if they're going to conform with the contaminated site regulation, and this is still an issue I don't think has been resolved at MOE, you know, aligning the landfill regs and closure plans with contaminated site regs, but once that landfill is closed and there's a monitoring plan in place, I think it'll behoove you to be looking for these things because they could be getting in the water and migrating and being an issue. So it's going to become, it's not going to be just a rare event that we look for these things. Another thing is a lot of these so-called emerging compounds, by the way, they're not emerging, they've been around for decades. These compounds have been used in home care products. They're going out into septic fields. And normally, you know, from a contaminated site perspective, septic field, it's domestic. We don't worry about that for our groundwater issue here. You know, that's just domestic. We're doing an industrial site. We're going to focus on the areas of potential concern. Well, the septic fields could be pumping these things in at nanogram per liter. Some of these things. We don't really know right now what the situation is in BC. No one's been spending the money and testing for it. But if we do start looking, just be careful what you look for. I don't mind going on these fishing trips, actually. I'm a big fan of knowing the facts out there. But I think this is going to happen. We're going to find some of these things showing up in areas we didn't know were there before. Another example, which isn't going to be covered in these regs, I was at a conference in Waterloo a few weeks ago, and there was a presentation from someone from BC here about viruses getting into our groundwater. Turns out viruses aren't absorbed by fractured rock or through the soil as well as we thought they were. And people are finding now enteroviruses showing up in water that have no hint of any kind of sewage indicators because they're not being absorbed and they're migrating small, you know, very small, much smaller than bacteria. So they're small colloidal, they're migrating conservative tracers. And on that note, another very good conservative tracer I was talking about this morning, for those of you when you're looking at sewage. And again, this is a technical side, but I just have to say it because it's so cool. You may have heard of using caffeine as a tracer of sewage effluent. Try acetosulfame from Diet Coke. It's everywhere. And it migrates conservatively. And great tracer of sewage effluent. Anyway, a bit of an aside, but I think we're going to start rethinking how we investigate the sites now and some of the materials we're going to be looking at. And these new regs are going to trigger it. Alkylated PAHs, Jennifer mentioned they're getting rid of total alkylated because that would be a nightmare for labs, I'm pretty sure. But methylnaphthalene, common constituent of petroleum hydrocarbons, like diesel. So it's probably one that will be with us in the new regs. It doesn't show up much in pyrogenic compounds such as creosote coal tar. That's more of a petrogenic substance and probably be looked at. Phenols, they're getting rid of the total phenol thing, which was always based on aesthetic anyways. You know, 2 parts per billion phenol in your water when you chlorinate, it gives you that stinky smell. But it wasn't tox-based. So we're going to go back to more fundamentals. Alcohol ethoxylates, no idea what these guys are. Maybe we can hear about that in the next presentation. It sounds like something I read on the ingredients of my cornflakes box or something. And then some of the pesticides are going to be coming regulated finally. Some of the new ones that are currently in use. permethrin. I think that's the one. I was in New Zealand years and years ago, and I bought some mosquito repellent, put it on, and the mosquito landed on my hand and it dropped dead. Right? That's illegal to put that stuff in Canada. But in New Zealand, you know, they're worried about dengue fever and stuff, so I think it was permethrin. Anyways, very low concentrations are concerned. And then these polybrominated diphenyl ethers, flame retardants. Again, maybe they're an environmental issue, but they're not everywhere, but again, probably a landfill thing. Jennifer mentioned the new standards coming out for wildlands, high-density residential. I might add here, I didn't add it here, but the parquet vapor, great. Finally, we can get some sanity into our vapor regs. There is some controversy. Well, I don't know. There's some things to be ironed out with the wildlands and high-density residential, as Jennifer mentioned. But on the assumption that those things do get ironed out, we'll be living with these new standards. I mentioned the phenols here. They're getting rid of the total phenols. They're also, Jennifer mentioned, getting rid of the organoleptic-based standards. You know, the ones that, you know, xylenes are stinky, but they're not toxic. They're not that toxic, right? So the standards might go up, and we don't have to have toxic, smelly standards. Having said that, though, I can see maybe there'll be civil lawsuits when people clean up a site to these new tox-based standards, but it still reeks. I can see that happening and someone getting a little upset. MOE will have to flag some of those. So the tox-based standards, as I think a lot of these substances for the tox-based standards the standards will go more stringent because of the new research. And some that may go too stringent, such as arsenic, will probably still stay where they are. That's maybe a good thing, unless you know, my water well on Salt Springs has 7 parts per billion arsenic in. Apparently that's greater than 100,000 chance of getting cancer. So we all have to live with that risk. So the process for developing the new standards. The process was supposed to have been finished off in September 2015. I see it's a couple of weeks late, but all the comments have been addressed by mid-October, according to Jennifer. The new standards, they're supposed to be number crunching, and that was supposed to be done by the end of this month. And now we hear it's going to be probably the end of the year. So the whole schedule shifted a month late, trying to meet this target date of May 6th. So what does this mean? Well, when the new standards come out, you can believe, I don't know if there's a formal process to provide feedback, like, holy crap, we can't live with that, that's way too stringent. Go back and re-crunch the numbers, that kind of shock. I know there's a formal area there to actually give feedback to MOE on that, but you can believe January and February are going to be some pretty hectic months over at MOE while they try and resolve all these issues and get these things finalized so they can be promulgated on May 6th. There will be a grandfather period, which is good. Presumably it'll be about a year, so I've guessed maybe April, May 2017. This grandfathering period, it's kind of essential. It gives you everybody time to sort of think about the new standards, how they're going to impact your sites. But you have to think about, for your particular site, some of the standards are going to be going up and some of them are going to be going down. So when do you want to get your certificate? So from a CSAP perspective and, environmental consultant perspective, you're going to have to look hard at your sites. Clients are going to have to look hard at their properties and decide is it more advantageous to spend a bunch of money now and get that certificate before these stringent standards come in, or in some other cases it might be better to after May 6th, presumably there's a grandfathering period, but you'll be able to use the new standards at your site to get certificates. So use the new standards. So we'll see how that shakes out. But certainly something to pay attention to. Another thing from a CSAP perspective, whenever there's a grandfathering period, it means a great big boost in applications. So as soon as you get to the end of the grandfathering period, you just get swamped by people trying to get certificates in the last minute. And that's predictable. I mean, as a matter of fact, we kind of like that. It gives a big boost to the system. So issues for consideration, I mentioned about scheduling grandfathering issues. This is about new substances. When we do our site investigations, our preliminary site assessments, we try and capture all the areas of concern and contaminants concern in the stage 1 PSI. I mean, it's a requirement. It's actually a legal requirement. So we got to get up to speed on should we even be looking for these things at our site. And sometimes if you don't look for them, you're better off than because if you look for them, you might be opening up a can of worms. But we're going to need some in my view, some guidance on where you should really be looking for these things and where not. Some of us in the industry are way too conservative. We'll just shotgun everything, and others are the other way. We hardly test anything. Oh no, that shouldn't be part of my area of concern. I think we could use some guidance there. And on the sampling protocols, I think this needs to be looked at very carefully. It's not just, oh, now we're going to go test for flame retardants. It's how do you actually get that sample and acquire it in a representative manner and make it repeatable and something everybody can live with. It's going to need some thought and some training. So I think there's a role here for both CSAP and MOE to put together some guidance that'll help us out in that area. And revised standards for existing substances, there's going to be issues. Some of these standards are going to go up, some are going to go down. We don't know what the issues are yet. You can imagine some of these sites that we've cleaned up already to numeric standards. If anybody goes and retests, they'll now be contaminated sites, right? So there might be, it's important for clients to know they just shouldn't go testing for the heck of it. If a site's got a certificate, that's great, but be careful what the can of worms you can open. You know, if you're selling the property and it doesn't need a certificate, I would really urge any new owners live with it. You go test it and find out now you're exceeding. I don't know. It's kind of legal. It's a bit iffy. But you can see some issues coming up when these standards get more stringent. I think that's it. How are we doing for time? Right on. I had no idea. Eh? So, any questions that I can take a stab at answering or defer? I like the way Jennifer, everything with MOE has been deferred to the next stage, right? any tough ones they have, we'll deal with that in a couple of years' time.
Hi.
Yeah.
You mentioned about new standard by May 6, 2016.
Yes, May 6.
You're talking about grandfathering with a question mark 2017.
That's right.
1 year.
So the grandfathering has been done before, right? A new regulation comes in and there's a grandfathering period before it actually comes into effect. So these new standards are probably going to have a grandfathering period. So May 6th, the numbers will be out there. They'll be in schedules, but they won't be enforceable until the end of the grandfathering period. So you can get a certificate with the old standards until the grandfathering period is over. Historically, it's been about a year, so that's why I said April, May, 2017. So this would be a big deal, right? I mean, you got a contaminated site. I don't know about you guys, but by the time you do your phase 1 and go through your next phase, and then you find, holy crap, and you go back and you do more and more and more, and you finally get everything written, and then you want to get the certificate, and then it takes a couple months. Back calculate it all. You better be thinking about this pretty darn quick.
You'll be thinking more about grandfathering, not the May 16th or May 6th.
Well, you got to be aware of both. As I said, some of your sites, the new standards are actually going to be less stringent. So you might want to, wait until May 6th. So even right now, there might be some sites you want to wait till May before you actually put in the certificate application.
And if you're doing like remediation with the redevelopment of the site, sometimes it's a whole year for them to do the whole excavation.
Yeah, it takes time. Our business takes time. I mean, that's how consultants make money, prolonging the problem. I shouldn't say that.
I think you've alluded to it. I'm curious for your perspective, so what to test for, but we already have a regime with Schedule 10 that has a lot of exotics or things that aren't tested for or have analytical methods. What do you think would be the difference between this update and the existing Schedule 10 and an approach to speaking to how do you limit what you test for?
Well, that's a good question. My cynical self tells me that a lot of consultants kind of ignore Schedule 10. I mean, a lot of these things, they're more than 4 or 5 syllables long. Who the heck knows? Who cares? And no one's asking. So no one's actually gone in to see where these things are used or why they should be testing for them. So I think a lot of Schedule 10 substances, while they're there, people haven't really worried about them too much. I know there's a requirement in CSAP, when you're doing an application, there's a requirement to say, have you checked the Schedule 10 substance list? Are there any potential issues? And you know, you got to say you checked it all, and we do. But once you put it in the context of these emerging compounds and how they behave in the subsurface, I think there's being attention drawn to this. That means we've got to wake up and smell the coffee.
Do you think these changes are going to increase the number of sites designated contaminated sites or lessen them? Or do you think some standards will go up, some will go down? Do you think the net effect is there's going to be more properties, you know, designated as a contaminated site or less? Probably more, but you got to realize, I mean, we've had the contaminated site rate now for a long time, so a lot of the real nasties have been identified and they're being managed already. So the number of new sites out there that are going to be discovered, I personally don't think there's going to be a ton. There's still some out there, but the net effect, I mean, the petroleum hydrocarbon sites, that's pretty well known, you know, the service stations, etc. So if the standards are less stringent, woohoo for them, aren't they lucky? But these other ones, the metals, a lot of the metals standards are going to be more stringent. There's going to be VOCs, just about everything else. So it's going to make probably more sites, but the thing is going to be harder to investigate, harder to remediate is probably the bigger issue.
I think PTE is already very low and apparently it's going to go lower.
I think Stefan will be addressing some specific ones like that. I believe that.
What about dichloroethylene? Is that what you mean, BCE? Trichloroethylene, yeah.
One question online, I'm not sure if you've already answered it. When will we be able to see the new standards, and knowing what they will be will help in planning submissions now versus later?
That's what I said. They're supposed to be out by the end of November. They've been delayed a month to the end of December. And that doesn't mean they're going to share them. I mean, what I heard Jennifer say is, you want to find out the new standards, know somebody at one of the laboratories and take them out for a beer.
Stefan will be talking to that as well, but because I have you on the spot and for perspective of your years of experience, one of the challenges as a lab is knowing how to support the general industry, all labs, and what analysis that you make or have available, because you just can't do everything on Schedule 10, and all these might not be practical or even theoretically, they will be theoretically possible to do, but just doing all these methods is not trivial, and at those detection limits especially. So is there any class or any particular analysis that you think will be more common after this, or will it be more same as usual? And this is more in the context of when Schedule 11 came out, there was a huge push around soil vapor. So we had seen that methods to support that, but I don't know if that is the same for this omnibus, or do you think there will be methods particularly that people will be targeting?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't think it'll be as dramatic as bringing in soil vapor, whole new media, right? This is going to be just more targeted on probably many more groundwater than soil, but so there'll be endocrine disruptors. Where did those show up? We can guess in, as I said, sewage effluents, landfill leachates, and if that indeed turns out to be the only things that are at issue, then it's not going to be it's not going to affect a lot of sites, but there'll be a push for those kind of things at the labs from certain sites.
I'm more of PFAS.
PFAS is everywhere, but everywhere, but I don't know about the concentrations. The real issues are going to be around flame retardants and airports and fire stations, whatever. But didn't they use that stuff on couches and things? I mean, that stuff got put into dumps. I mean, it's all around. Anyways, time's running out. I better sit down.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right, hopefully a lot of those analysis-specific questions will be answered in Stefan's presentation, right? So please join me in welcoming our technical manager at CARO, Stefan Varisco. He's been, I'll do a bit of a bio as well. So thank you very much, Stefan.
Good morning, everyone.
I'm really excited to speak to you today. So first we had a presentation from the ministry. Today we had their perspective. Then we had the consultant's perspective. Now I'm going to speak on the laboratory's perspective on the proposed Stage 10 amendment. To give you a little bit of background about myself, I've been in this industry now for about 18 years. Most of it has been spent with CARO. I started at the bench level doing many of the tests that we offer, spanning metals, inorganics, and organics. So I have good understanding of the test methods. Worked my way up to coordinator, operations manager for a little while before Patrick came on board. I was also heavily involved in our quality management system. And for the past 8 years, I've been serving as a technical manager. So my job is quite interesting, lots of variety, lots of problems to solve and challenges. I take care of our laboratory information management system, our data and our reports, and as well helping out with the method validation and method proficiencies and stuff like that. So just a bit of an overview. First, a little bit of a background. What does this mean for the environmental testing industry and a lab like CARO? Then the heart of the presentation is really the proposed revisions from a lab perspective, as well as some of the potential new and emerging compounds that the ministry is looking at. And finally, an industry response. So for CARO, well, I did some just a look at our workload, and about 1/3 of our analytical testing is related to the contaminated site regulations, Schedules 4, 5, 6, and 11, spanning soil, water, and air. We were leaders with the development of soil vapor back in 2009. We do a lot of other testing, as you know, wastewater, drinking water, microbiological, bioassays out of our Alberta location. We've also recently got into food testing. We secured a contract with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, testing for trace contaminants, mainly pesticides in fruits and vegetables, processed foods, and from honey. So a lot of that has allowed us to get the equipment that is needed to some of these emerging compounds of concern that I will talk about. So from, again, from our perspective, there's actually only 3 parameter groups that represent about 80% of the contaminated site testing, and those are the semi-volatiles, pH, and the test that they make up. We've got metals, we've got volatiles, VOC, VH, and soil, water, and air. So that's about 80% of our contaminated site testing. The balance is the supporting tests like phenols, PCB, the salt standards, and some of the general parameters used as indicators on your contaminated sites. So BCELTAC. So Jennifer spoke on BCELTAC. For those of you that don't know what it stands for, it's the British Columbia Environmental Laboratory Technical Advisory Committee. Quite a mouthful. Before, we used to be called BCELTAC, so we changed the name for somewhat obvious reasons. It is an industry partnership with the Ministry of Environment. We have representatives from all the major labs here in the Lower Mainland. There's 5 of us. Even the federal lab in North Vancouver. We've got industry reps. We've got a consultant. We've got a contaminated site person and a waste management professional, and also we've got a couple of ministry representatives. We meet on a quarterly basis at the ministry offices in Guildford. CARO has been involved for about 10 years. I started with Brent Masato, our president, and I've taken the helm in the last 7 years or so. A lot of what we do is related to methods and method authorship. Personally, I've been involved in writing a number of those methods, the soil vapor methods, VOC and oil and grease, and some of the metals methods as well. There's 2 types of methods that we work on. The first one is a prescribed method. So an example would be the strong acid leachable metals that we use for metals and soil. It's very unique to the industry. There's no other organization like BCELTAC that we're aware of in the country that has these kind of standardized methods. So we've led the way with that. Then we have our performance-based methods. Examples of those would be EPH and VH, made in BC methods that allow for some variation, really to foster innovation. They're quite progressive. Labs have the opportunity to, improve the methods, provided that we meet certain benchmarks that we can get the recoveries that are specified in those methods. So really the essence is that these standardized provincial methods really provide a basis for laboratory alignment in the province. Some of the things that we're working on recently, you're probably already aware of the new EPH and water method that is coming into effect. Also, at the same time, there's just a ministry email in the last week about the LEP, HEP, and VPH co-reporting requirements. So what that means is if you want VPH, typically you already get VH and VTEX and styrene, which are used in the calculations, but now they will be required as of January 4th, 2016. And also Jennifer mentioned this letter that we submitted to the ministry on August 28th with 15 recommendations and comments regarding the Stage 10 amendments. And we have a very good relationship with the ministry. They take us seriously, so many good comments that Jennifer spoke to already. One more thing I just want to speak about briefly is this whole detection limits, reporting limits. There's a bit of misconception in the industry. A lower detection limit is better. Well, not necessarily. It obviously depends on your method. But a method detection limit is something that's generally kept internal. It is a statistically derived number based on spiking a clean matrix, doing some statistical analysis on that. At that level, the uncertainty of your data is quite high. High meaning 100% or more. Then we have the reporting limit, which you would typically see on the analytical report. It could be MRL, RL, RDL. There's different conventions. That is based on reality. Typically, we have a margin of comfort of 2 to 3 times above the MDL or more. The uncertainty at that level is still, in the relatively high range, 50 to 100%. So if the reporting limit is 10, 10 plus or minus 5 would be, reasonable. But what our goal is as a lab is that our default reporting limit is actually below the CSR standard. So if the CSR standard is lower, we may have to lower our method reporting limit with an improved method. And we want to give it a little bit lower as well to allow for raising that reporting limit, sometimes due to moisture or analytical interferences. And so really the point I want to make, a lower reporting limit is not necessarily better, but it's important to look at those reporting limits in relation to the standards. So now, okay, revisions to existing standards. This was already talked about. Guy did a good presentation on the impacts of the recent advancements in science over the last 20 years are driving this, as well as some alignment with other jurisdictions like CCME. From my perspective, we've got 2 categories. The standards adjusted, as Guy spoke to, lowered or raised. And we do suspect that some of the PAHs of VOCs and metals will be lowered. Not all of them. Some will be raised. But from a lab perspective, it wouldn't really impact anything. We're still going to give you the same reporting limit. Then from a redefinition standpoint, as Guy spoke to already, the total non-chlorinated phenol separation. Another thing that wasn't mentioned is total PCB. Right now it includes 4 air chlors or mixtures. There is a move to make that based on 9, which is the representative of the 9 air chlors that Monsanto manufactured back in, historically. Another one is benzo B and benzo K fluorancine. From a lab's perspective, they're a little bit difficult to separate. The CCME has already moved toward one standard for both of those. So that may be coming as well. I don't know about 2016, but it's something that they're aware of. The emerging contaminants of concern, I just put a definition up here that I pulled off the internet for those of you that don't know. And some examples, again, that Guy spoke to, alkylated pHs, antimicrobials, endocrine disruptors, etc., pharmaceutical and personal care products that we actually already analyze for here at CARO. These might not necessarily be the drivers of a contaminated site, but as Guy said, doing your diligence on a site where these things may be known to exist is in your best interest. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how they differ from the other contaminants that we are already testing for in the CSR. From a chemical standpoint, a lot of these have many isomers, and not only that, but many degradation products. So we're not just looking for one thing. And usually if we're looking for a total aggregate number, we have to analyze for all the individual parameters anyways to get there. And also some of those different isomers have much different toxicities from other ones. So it's a little bit unclear how the ministry wants to go with that. Also, some of these have higher solubilities in water. So from a lab, we might not do a solvent extraction. We might do it direct into a more sensitive instrument. And because of the fact that they have a generally high water solubility, they are ubiquitous, just like trace metals, prone to contamination, and also, not only positive biases, but negative as they stick to certain things. From an economic standpoint, the instrumentation required to do these analyses is expensive. Just as an example, an LC-MS that we have that we needed to purchase for doing our food testing is in the neighborhood of $500,000. So not only that, but the standards that are needed for some of these tests are in the tens of thousands of dollars. So it makes for expensive tests. The going rate is in the $300 to $500 range for a typical LC-MS analysis, and more for a high-resolution GC test. They can be time-consuming. They require a skilled analyst to review the data, so that can result in higher turnaround times. You can't necessarily push these out in 1 or 2 days. And also historically, there's been a lower demand for these just because of cost and due to not being regulated. And even now that they will be regulated, again, like I said, they may not necessarily be the drivers of the contaminated site, or can be used for environmental monitoring, as this has been done for the past few decades. Some examples, as we've spoken to, antimicrobials, you talked about triclosan. Another one is triclocarbon, likely to be regulated. Again, used as antibacterial soaps, and in the medical industry, they are endocrine disruptors. They affect reproductive health of aquatic organisms. Instrumentation for these is an LC-MS. We're looking at 50 parts per trillion or lower detection limits, and we don't know what the standards are going to be yet, but we have the ability to test for these at very low levels. But again, contamination can become an issue when we go down that low. Another category is hormones, and a good indicator parameter for this is 17-alpha ethynylestradiol. It is used it's a mouthful. It's used as a contraceptive. Again, endocrine disruptor, LC-MS, and we're looking at single-digit parts per trillion detection for that. Alkylated pH is generally not used for anything, but mainly degradation products. As Guy mentioned, 1 and 2-methyl-naphthalene are likely to be regulated, but there is a move towards more in the future. Bioaccumulation is a problem. Even literature suggests that it's worse than the parent pHs because of the methylation makes them a little bit more stable. Now, the instrumentation for these is not LC-MS, it's GC-MS or GC-MS, and some of you will have an opportunity to go into our lab after and see the instrumentation that we use. We have both of these instruments, again, and really what you use depends on the specificity that you're looking for and the degree of, there's thousands of these if you really want to get detailed. Some of the other ones as well that CARO does not do but are for active considerations, PFAS was spoken about, and the detergents, nonylphenol and orthophenol, so they are used as detergents, and they also have what's known as the ethoxylates, subcategorical compounds. Both of these LC-MS as well. And finally, the flame retardants, we use a high-resolution GC-MS for that. There are 2 really good labs already in the province that do these that have international reputation, so it's not likely that more labs will be entering the market for these anytime in the near future. So finally, what does this mean for the BC labs and the clients that we serve? Well, as a whole, through BCELTAC, the ministry has promised to provide us with the proposed standards in the near future, December or January. We want to ensure, as Jennifer spoke to earlier, is that the standard is achievable, not just by one lab with some obscure method, but that they're realistic. As an example, when the ministry came out with the ACC list before Schedule 11, there were some standards that were difficult for labs to achieve, and we actually pushed back. And the standards that you find in Schedule 11 have been adjusted to meet the lab's practical capabilities. We expect the same with the Stage 10 assessment, the Stage 10 new parameters. So BCELTAC, again, will be working to revise and create new provincial methods. They won't necessarily be a full method, but they will outline the key points, the sample handling requirements, the QC requirements that would be necessary. From an individual lab perspective, like CARO, we may need to revalidate an existing method or create a new method, look at some of the instrumentation that is necessary to achieve these. And also, as accreditation is very important to us. We are CALA accredited here. There's also FCC, which is another accreditation body for labs in Canada, which would involve updating our scope of accreditation to ensure that we can provide our clients with the confidence that we are proficient at doing these tests. So that basically concludes my presentation for now. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Any questions, or was that?
I have a comment here.
Okay.
It seems to me we're kind of lucky in BC here to have BCELTAC because it gives you flexibility to creatively come up with new methods and not stuck with doing the old SW846 out of the US.
Yeah. We're very progressive in BC compared to, say, Ontario or the EPA, where you're locked into using a method. There is one example of a method that we do have to adhere to verbatim is the TCLP method, EPA 1311, and there was recently some dialogue between the ministry and directives from CALA that we have to follow it verbatim because it is a legal requirement, and it does actually put the labs can put them into difficult position because the technology has changed so much from when the method was written.
Right.
And to that, though, we really, I think, we see it as an opportunity for BC to lead, and the companies in BC to lead, but some of the changes that happen for the methanol vials are probably more because other jurisdictions are using them, not so much as it's a massive technical validity to that. And I think that's one of the challenges. We don't highlight our BC companies don't grow and infect other jurisdictions with this, then we will be infected by the other. And that is what's happening as firms get larger, the offices and others, we should be using this method. And that's something that we see BC as leaders, but we are a little oasis, and then some of these other changes that keep on coming. So this is a part of that, trying to have science leading, but also we do see some headwinds on.
Another method that was mentioned by Jennifer is this, does BC continue with the provincial EPH method or go with the CCME? Well, again, we're unique. I think we're the only jurisdiction in North America that has a hydrocarbon method for water now. And a lot of labs are doing the CCME, THC, and water, but there is no method for it. There's standards for it in some jurisdictions. And this method was developed by a task force that was put together, 15, 20 years ago. There is no move to update that method or anything like that. So again, locked into a method as opposed to, allowing the labs to drive the methodology.
Okay. Any other questions? I think we're good online, so. We'll close the session. Thank you everybody for coming. Yeah.
Thank you.
Great.
I think,